Get out of my house right now. The piercing scream tore through the dead silence of the Sterling Estate's grand marble hallway. It was sharp, ruthless, and dripping with absolute disgust. In the center of the massive foyer, 3-year-old Zuri did not cry. She did not run away. She simply stood there, her enormous dark brown eyes staring up at the stunning, furious woman towering over her. Zuri's tiny hands frantically clutched the frayed edge of her mother's faded apron. Maya, the estate's maid and Zuri's mother, froze in pure, unadulterated terror. Every single person present in that hallway, from the seasoned butler to the cleaning crew, completely stopped breathing. The air grew so thick and suffocating that you could hear a pin drop on the imported Italian stone. And then a sound broke the tension. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, and immensely powerful footsteps echoing from the top of the grand spiral staircase. The billionaire had arrived. He had heard everything. Every single word. And what happened in the next 60 seconds would permanently alter the destinies of everyone standing in that house. It would happen in the most brutal and spectacular way imaginable. Welcome back, everyone. If this is your first time visiting the channel, I am incredibly glad you found us. Drop a comment right now and let me know where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one and absolutely love seeing your locations. If you have not subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Here, we tell stories that will genuinely give you chills. These are stories that expose the true faces hiding behind polite society. Stay with me until the very last second of today's video. I promise you the final twist is so deeply chilling that even I could not see it coming when I first read it. It will completely flip everything you thought you knew. Alright, let us begin. Some mansions look like absolute paradise from the outside. But only the ghosts living in the shadows of those walls know the rotting truth hidden within. The Sterling estate sat proudly at the peak of a winding private road. It was guarded by absurdly perfect hedges and massive black iron gates that seemed specifically designed to keep the world out. From a distance, it looked like a castle ripped straight from the cover of a luxury architectural digest. It boasted ancient limestone walls, an intricately carved fountain in the circular driveway, and floor-to-ceiling glass windows. When the evening sun hit those windows, it scattered light across the manicured gardens like pure liquid gold. Inside, the air was perpetually thick with the scent of freshly cut peonies. That floral sweetness masked the sharp, expensive perfume of the elite who walked its halls. But deep inside the belly of that cold, luxurious beast, there was a hidden world. Behind a complex maze of back hallways, there was a small, cramped, but strangely warm kitchen. No important guest ever set foot in this room. Here, a woman named Maya hummed a quiet, soulful tune while meticulously folding a stack of silk tablecloths. Maya was 31 years old. She was a beautiful black woman with a spirit forged in steel. Her natural curls were always pulled back into a tight, hurried bun. Her hands, calloused and dry, never stopped moving. Deep within her dark eyes, there was a permanent, bone-deep exhaustion that she could never quite hide. She had been working in the Sterling estate for 4 grueling years. That meant 4 years of waking up long before the sun even thought about rising. 4 years of kneeling on cold marble to polish floors that wealthy, heartless people walked over without ever looking down. 4 years of existing as a completely invisible shadow. She was just a cleaning machine in a house packed with people who only knew how to give orders. Yet Maya never complained. Not even once. This was not because she was weak or cowardly. It was because every humiliation she swallowed, every drop of sweat she shed, was for one single reason. She did it for a life far more important than her own. She did it for her daughter, Zuri. Zuri had just turned 3 years old. She was tiny, with gorgeous dark skin and big, round eyes that held a boundless curiosity about the world. She had a bright, infectious smile and a giggling laugh that somehow warmed up the freezing servants' quarters. Every single day, Zuri would quietly tuck herself into a hidden corner of whatever massive room her mother was cleaning. She would sit perfectly still on a small, neatly folded blanket. She spent hours playing with a worn-out stuffed lion she named Leo. She would just watch her mother work with those wide, innocent eyes. Maya simply had no other choice. She had no family nearby to rely on, and absolutely no money for a daycare. And Mr. Marcus Sterling, the legendary self-made black billionaire who owned this massive empire, had always been quietly understanding. He never once uttered a single complaint when he accidentally caught Zuri's gaze in the long corridors. Sometimes, when walking past the kitchen, the powerful man would suddenly stop. He would pause, turn his head, and look at the little girl. In those fleeting moments, the normally cold, calculating mask of the CEO would melt away. It was replaced by an unexplainable softness. It was a profound, almost trembling emotion, as if he was recognizing a deep lost piece of his own soul. Maya had always noticed that look. But she forced herself to bite her tongue and swallow her desperate questions. You simply do not ask your billionaire boss personal questions when you are desperately clinging to a job to keep your child from starving. And so life went on in a fragile, careful, and quiet balance. That was until exactly 6 months ago. That was the day the dark cloud named Victoria Vance officially moved into the mansion. Victoria was a stunning, wealthy white woman who carried herself like absolute royalty. She possessed the kind of breathtaking beauty that only comes from old money and supreme arrogance. Her blonde hair was always flawlessly styled, her piercing blue eyes cold and sharp as broken glass. She walked into the Sterling estate not just as a fiancée, but as a dictator claiming her new kingdom. Within weeks, she established a ruthless reign of terror. She looked at the servants as if they were a contagious disease. But it was not just the brutal shift in power that terrified the staff. Something else, something far more sinister, began happening right around the time Victoria unpacked her designer bags. Marcus Sterling, a man famously known for his towering strength and endless stamina, began to physically fade. It started as a minor, uncharacteristic fatigue. Then came the unbearable, blinding migraines. Recently, the staff whispered that he had been coughing up blood behind the heavy mahogany doors of his study. The most expensive doctors in the country were brought in, but they were completely baffled. No one knew what was destroying the Titan from the inside out. But Maya and a few other observant maids had noticed something deeply unsettling. Every single afternoon, Victoria insisted on brewing Marcus's tea herself. She would carry the delicate porcelain cup into his study, a strange, triumphant smirk playing on her pale lips. The tea always carried a faint, metallic, almost sickly sweet odor that lingered in the hallway. But Maya was just a maid. She was a nobody from the absolute bottom of the social ladder. How could she ever accuse the powerful future Mrs. Sterling of slowly murdering the billionaire? So Maya kept her head down, praying for a miracle while sweeping the floors. But this morning the fragile peace shattered completely. It was a freezing Tuesday in November. Little Zuri had wandered out of the kitchen, her tiny socks padding softly against the cold stone. She was exploring the grand hallway when she spotted something shiny near the base of the staircase. To a 3-year-old, it looked like a beautiful silver treasure. She reached down and picked it up. It was a small metallic silver capsule. It had slipped straight out of the pocket of Victoria's expensive silk robe just moments before. Zuri, her face lighting up with pure joy, held it up to show the lady standing on the stairs. And that was the exact moment Victoria Vance completely lost her mind. "Get out of my house right now! Get out of my house right now!" The echo of Victoria Vance's cruel voice bounced off the towering marble walls. It was a sound so venomous that it made the very air in the grand hallway feel toxic. Zuri, terrified by the sudden explosion of rage, instantly dropped the shiny silver capsule. It hit the cold Italian stone with a sharp metallic clink. Before the 3-year-old girl could even process what was happening, Maya threw herself forward. She dropped to her knees on the hard floor, frantically wrapping her arms around her daughter to shield her from the billionaire's furious fiancé. Victoria stepped down the remaining stairs, her expensive designer heels clicking like loaded gunshots. She practically lunged forward and snatched the silver capsule off the floor. She shoved it deep into the pocket of her luxurious silk robe with trembling, panicked fingers. For a fraction of a second, Victoria's face was completely drained of blood. She looked genuinely terrified. But within the blink of an eye, that fear was buried under a thick, ugly layer of elite arrogance. "I told you from day one," Victoria hissed. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger right at Maya's face. "This is not a charity shelter for the poor. I am the lady of this estate, and I will absolutely not tolerate filthy vermin crawling around my main halls." Maya held Zuri tighter, her own heart hammering violently against her ribs. "Miss Vance, please," Maya begged, her voice thick with desperation. "I am so sorry." She just wandered out for a single second. "It will never happen again, I swear to you." Have you ever been completely powerless? Have you ever found yourself standing in front of someone who holds your entire livelihood in their manicured hands? It is a sickening, suffocating feeling, the kind of helplessness that burns a hole right through your soul. Maya was swallowing her pride, burying her dignity, and apologizing to a monster simply to keep a roof over her child's head. But people like Victoria do not see the working class as human beings. They view them as broken appliances, and when an appliance is in the way, you simply throw it out. "Oh, you are damn right, it will never happen again," Victoria sneered. She looked down at Maya with absolute, unmasked disgust, curling her lip as if she was looking at a pile of garbage. "Because you are packing your trash and leaving. Both of you. You have exactly 10 minutes to get off my property before I have the security guards drag you out by your hair." Maya's eyes filled with tears of pure, stinging humiliation. She had endured 4 years of backbreaking labor in this house. She had polished these floors until her hands bled. And now she was being thrown out into the freezing November streets simply because her toddler had found a dropped item. But before Maya could say another word, a heavy, deliberate sound shifted the gravity in the room. Cock, cock, cock. The footsteps from the top of the grand staircase grew louder. The staff members standing in the shadows instantly stiffened, lowering their heads in absolute submission. Marcus Sterling emerged from the shadows of the second floor. He was a towering, imposing figure, a legendary self-made titan who had fought his way up from the gritty streets of Chicago to build a global tech empire worth billions. Even dressed casually in a simple black button-down shirt and dress slacks, his presence commanded the entire room. But if you looked closely, as Maya often did, you could see the dark truth hiding beneath the power. You could see the terrible toll the mysterious illness had taken on him over the last 6 months. His sharp cheekbones were noticeably hollow. The dark, piercing eyes carried a heavy, unnatural exhaustion. Just last week, Maya had secretly wiped a few drops of blood from the bathroom sink inside his study. He was dying. The strongest man she had ever known was rotting from the inside out, and no doctor on earth could figure out why. Yet, as he walked down those stairs, his aura was terrifyingly calm. "Victoria!" Marcus's deep, gravelly voice echoed through the massive foyer. He did not shout. He did not have to. His voice was a low rumble, but it carried the devastating weight of an earthquake. Victoria instantly spun around, her posture snapping to attention. The ugly, snarling mask of a ruthless dictator vanished in a fraction of a second. It was miraculously replaced by the smooth, practiced pout of a concerned, delicate partner. "Marcus, darling," Victoria cooed, her voice suddenly dripping with fake sweetness. "I am so sorry you had to hear that. I was just handling a minor pest problem down here." She gestured toward Maya and Zuri like they were an infected disease. This maid let her feral child run loose in the main hall. She was touching my things. "You know how much stress I am under trying to manage this massive house for you, while you are unwell." Marcus did not look at Victoria. He descended the final steps slowly, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the marble. His dark, calculating eyes were locked entirely on Maya. She was still kneeling on the cold floor, desperately shielding her shaking daughter. The silence in the room was deafening. The butler, the security guards, the cleaning crew, everyone held their breath, completely paralyzed by the tension. They all knew Marcus Sterling was a fair man, but they also knew he was ruthlessly protective of his private space. Would he side with his glamorous, wealthy white fiancée? Would he fire the poor black maid and her child without a second thought? Marcus stopped exactly 3 feet away from them. He looked down at Maya's trembling shoulders. Then his gaze slowly drifted downward to the tiny, terrified girl hiding behind her mother's faded apron. Zuri peeked out from behind the fabric. Her big, innocent brown eyes looked straight up and met the towering billionaire's intense stare. For a long, agonizing moment, the entire world seemed to stop spinning. Marcus's chest hitched suddenly. A strange, sharp breath escaped his lips, sounding almost like a gasp. His dark eyes widened just a fraction of an inch. He stared at the little girl as if he had just seen a ghost. He scanned every single detail of Zuri's face with a frantic, trembling focus. He looked at the shape of her jawline. He analyzed the unique, sharp curve of her eyebrows. He stared deep into the soulful dark brown of her eyes. "What did she touch?" Marcus asked softly. His voice was barely above a whisper, and his eyes never left Zuri's face. Victoria scoffed loudly, crossing her arms in an exaggerated display of annoyance. "Just some trash on the floor. It doesn't matter, Marcus. What matters is the blatant disrespect. I want them gone. Now." But Maya had seen it. Maya had seen the exact moment Victoria snatched that shiny silver capsule from Zuri's tiny hands. And in a sudden flash of pure, desperate courage, driven by a mother's fierce instinct to protect her child from being labeled a thief, Maya spoke up. "She didn't touch your personal belongings, Miss Vance," Maya said. Her voice was shaking violently, but she forced herself to look up and meet Victoria's cold glare. "It fell out of your pocket. It was a little silver pill capsule. Zuri just picked it up to give it back to you." The temperature in the massive marble hallway plummeted to absolute zero. Victoria's face instantly drained of all color, turning a sickening shade of ghost white. Her perfectly manicured hands instinctively flew to the pocket of her silk robe. She clutched the fabric tightly, a gesture born of pure, unadulterated panic. "Shut up, you lying, miserable creature." Victoria Srieketh. Her carefully crafted facade cracked wide open, revealing the terrified monster underneath. "Marcus, she is lying to save her pathetic job. Throw her out into the street right now." But Marcus Sterling did not look at Victoria. He slowly turned his head. His dark, piercing eyes locked onto his fiancée's trembling hands. The exact same hands that were desperately clutching her pocket. The exact same hands that every single afternoon for the past 6 months had lovingly brewed his private tea. "A silver pill capsule?" Marcus repeated. The softness in his voice was completely gone. It was replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly sharp edge. A silver pill capsule? Marcus repeated. The softness in his voice was completely gone. It was replaced by a cold, calculating, and terrifyingly sharp edge. He took one slow, deliberate step toward Victoria. The towering billionaire suddenly looked like an apex predator cornering its prey. "Marcus, darling, it is nothing," Victoria stammered. Her usually flawless, confident voice was cracking uncontrollably. She took a step back, her expensive heels scraping awkwardly against the Italian marble. "It is just my vitamin supplements. You know, my skin has been breaking out. This maid is just trying to cause drama to save her pathetic job." Marcus did not blink. His dark, piercing eyes were locked entirely on the pocket of her silk robe. He remembered the metallic, sickly sweet scent that lingered in his study every single afternoon for the past 6 months. He remembered the blinding migraines, the sudden fatigue, the blood in the sink. And he remembered how fiercely Victoria insisted on brewing his tea behind closed doors, never letting the kitchen staff touch his cup. "Show it to me," Marcus commanded. The sheer authority in his voice made the crystal chandelier above them seem to vibrate. "Marcus, you are embarrassing me in front of the help," Victoria shrieked, her face twisting into a desperate, ugly panic. "I said, show it to me, Victoria. Now." The hallway was paralyzed. The elite, untouchable white woman who had terrorized this estate for months was suddenly trapped. Her manicured hands were violently shaking. She knew that if he opened that capsule, her entire empire of lies would instantly collapse. But as Marcus stood there, staring at the trembling hands of his would-be murderer, his gaze involuntarily drifted back to the floor, to the impoverished black maid kneeling on the cold stone, to the tiny, terrified 3-year-old girl clutching her faded apron. Zuri was looking up at him again, and this time Marcus saw it with undeniable, heart-stopping clarity. The shape of her jawline, the unique, sharp curve of her eyebrows. It was a perfect miniature reflection of his own mother's face. Two earth-shattering truths collided in Marcus's brain at the exact same millisecond. The glamorous woman he was supposed to marry was slowly poisoning him to death, and the exhausted, invisible maid she was trying to throw out into the freezing streets was secretly raising his own flesh and blood. Did you feel that? Stop the tape right there. Freeze this exact moment. Look closely at the scene unfolding in this grand hallway. A billionaire realizing he is sleeping next to his own assassin, while the woman carrying his only child is kneeling on the floor in a ragged apron, begging for mercy from a monster. How did we get to this twisted, tragic intersection of fate? To truly understand the heartbreaking magnitude of this climax, we have to rewind the clock. We need to go back exactly 4 years. Long before the iron gates, the billions, and the poison. 4 years ago, Marcus Sterling was not a legendary titan. He was a ruthless, brilliant, but deeply exhausted entrepreneur fighting a brutal war to keep his rising tech company from being swallowed by greedy Wall Street sharks. He was working 100-hour weeks, completely isolated, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Maya was 27. She was working 3 back-breaking jobs just to keep the lights on in her tiny, drafty apartment. One of those jobs was serving champagne at elite corporate galas. She was invisible to the wealthy elites. But one evening at a charity dinner in a suffocatingly pretentious hotel, she escaped to a quiet back corridor to rest her aching feet. That was where she bumped into Marcus. He was hiding from the vicious investors, his tie loosened, looking utterly defeated. They did not share a fairy tale romance. They shared a moment of raw, unfiltered human connection. Two exhausted souls who recognized the same deep loneliness in each other's eyes. They talked for hours on the back steps of the hotel. They shared their fears, their dreams, and for one night, The crushing weight of their respective worlds completely vanished. But the very next morning, a hostile takeover attempt rocked Marcus's company. He was immediately pulled onto a private jet to Tokyo, completely swallowed by a brutal corporate war that lasted for months. He lost his personal phone. The connection was severed in the chaos. And 3 weeks later, Maya discovered she was pregnant. She tried to reach him. She called his corporate offices, but the ruthless receptionists and PR managers completely blocked her. They treated her like just another opportunistic gold digger trying to scam a rising billionaire. Crushed, terrified, and totally alone, Maya made a heartbreaking decision. She swallowed her pride and built an impenetrable wall around her heart. She worked until her hands bled to prepare for her baby. When Zuri was born, she became Maya's entire universe. But the medical bills piled up. The rent skyrocketed. Desperate to provide a safe roof and health insurance for her child, Maya applied for a cleaning position through an anonymous staffing agency. She did not know the estate belonged to Marcus until her very first day on the job. When she saw him, she was paralyzed with fear. What if he thought she was stalking him? What if he used his immense wealth and power to take Zuri away from her? Terrified of losing her daughter to the brutal legal system, Maya chose absolute silence. She hid in plain sight. For 3 agonizing years, she scrubbed the floors of the man she once loved, watching him from the shadows, making sure her little girl stayed hidden in the corners of the kitchen. She sacrificed her entire identity, her dignity and her youth, all to protect Zuri. Now drag yourself back to the present. The freezing marble hallway. The dropped capsule. The terrifying silence. The 4 years of agonizing secrets and silent sacrifices have led to this exact explosive millisecond. The fuse has been lit. And the detonation is going to be absolutely glorious. Marcus Sterling slowly turned his body completely away from Victoria. He crouched down, his expensive suit pants grazing the cold floor. He was now eye level with Maya and little Zuri. "How long?" Marcus whispered. His voice was completely broken, stripped of all the billionaire armor. Maya closed her eyes. A single heavy tear escaped and rolled down her dark cheek. She did not need to ask what he meant. She knew the secret was over. 3 years, Maya choked out, her voice barely audible. She just turned 3. Marcus let out a ragged, shaking breath. He slowly reached out his massive, trembling hand and gently touched Zuri's tiny shoulder. The little girl did not flinch. She just stared at him with those big, beautiful eyes. His eyes. Victoria Vance watched this interaction with growing horror. The panic inside her was boiling over into absolute madness. "What is going on?" Victoria screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. She stomped her heel on the marble. "Marcus, get up. Why are you looking at that filthy rat like that? I demand you throw them out." Marcus stood up. Very slowly. He turned back to face his fiancée. And in that moment the exhausted, sick man was entirely gone. Standing before Victoria was the ruthless, terrifying titan who had crushed empires. "Security," Marcus said. His voice was deadly calm and echoed through the grand hall. Instantly, 4 massive, suited security guards stepped out from the shadows, their hands resting on their radios. Victoria let out a triumphant, cruel laugh. A sickening smile stretched across her pale face. "Finally," she sneered, pointing a vicious finger at Maya. "You heard him. Grab that pathetic maid and her brat and throw them out into the dirt where they belong." "Not them," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, sounding like heavy iron sliding into place. "Her." The guards did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. They marched right past Maya and Zuri, their heavy tactical boots thudding with terrifying precision against the marble floor. Before Victoria could even process what was happening, the four massive men formed a tight, impenetrable wall around her, completely cutting off her escape routes. Victoria gasped, her eyes darting frantically around the circle of towering security personnel. The triumphant smirk on her face instantly vanished. "Marcus, what is the absolute meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking under a sudden wave of panic. "Have you completely lost your mind? I am your fiancée. I am the future lady of this entire empire. Why are your thugs surrounding me? You are a guest in my house, Victoria. A guest who is about to be searched," Marcus said. His face was completely expressionless, looking like it was carved out of granite, but his dark eyes burned with a lethal predatory fire. He stepped closer to her, his towering shadow completely swallowing her small, trembling frame. "Take the capsule out of your pocket. Put it on the table right now. If you don't, I will personally authorize my men to hold you down and strip it from your hands before the police arrive." "Police!" Victoria let out a hysterical, breathless laugh, but the sound was thin, sharp, and dripping with pure terror. "For what? For taking my daily vitamin supplements? This is absolutely ridiculous. Marcus, darling, you are letting a lying, pathetic maid manipulate your judgment. Look at her. She is a nobody. She is probably trying to blackmail you with some fabricated story because she knows you are unwell." Marcus didn't back down an inch. He didn't even blink. He turned his head slightly toward the head of his security detail. "Brandon," Marcus commanded, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. "Call the police department's Special Victims and Major Crimes hotline immediately. Tell them we have an active, ongoing attempted murder case at the Sterling estate. And then call Dr. Evans. Tell him to get to this house with a full forensic toxicology kit right now." The moment the word toxicology left Marcus's lips, Victoria's composure shattered into a million jagged pieces. The elite, untouchable facade she had worn for years was instantly obliterated. She knew she was caught. She knew that the unique, highly restricted chemical compound she had been meticulously slipping into his tea every single afternoon would be identified within minutes of a medical test. It was a slow-acting neurotoxin, a horrific poison designed to mimic a degenerative neurological disease. It was nearly impossible to detect in standard blood panels unless a doctor knew exactly what rare compound to look for. Victoria's plan had been flawless. Slowly erode Marcus's internal organs over several months, make his death look like a tragic, unpreventable medical anomaly, and then inherit a massive chunk of his multi-billion-dollar tech empire as his grieving widow. In a desperate, frantic move born of pure madness, Victoria thrust her hand deep into her silk robe pocket, gripped the silver capsule, and tried to sprint toward the massive front doors. She needed to get rid of it. She wanted to throw it into the fountain outside, to crush it under her heel, to destroy the only piece of physical evidence that linked her directly to the billionaire's failing health. But Brandon was a seasoned professional. With a swift, practiced movement, the head of security intercepted her, firmly grabbing her wrist and locking her arm behind her back. "Let go of me. Get your filthy, disgusting hands off me," Victoria screamed, kicking and thrashing like a wild animal caught in a trap, her elegant blonde hair falling wildly out of its perfect style. "Hold her still," Marcus roared, his voice booming through the grand hallway like a clap of thunder, shaking the very foundation of the house. Brandon applied a precise pressure point to her wrist. Victoria's fingers involuntarily flew open with a sharp gasp of pain. The silver capsule slipped from her grasp, tumbling through the air before landing perfectly in Marcus's open palm. Marcus held the capsule up to the bright light of the crystal chandelier. It was a high-grade, vacuum-sealed medical capsule, completely unmarked. He brought it close to his nose and inhaled deeply. And there it was. Even through the seamless medical seal, a faint, barely perceptible trace of that familiar, sickly sweet, metallic odor hit his senses. It was the exact same smell that accompanied every single cup of artisanal tea Victoria had lovingly handed him in his study over the last 6 months. The tea she insisted on brewing herself. The tea she smiled so beautifully at him while watching him drink down to the very last drop. Marcus felt a cold, sickening shiver run straight down his spine, followed immediately by a wave of blinding fury. The woman he had shared his bed with, the woman he trusted with his deepest vulnerabilities, had been looking him dead in the eyes every single day while signing his death warrant. Take a breath with me right here. Let that sink in. Can you even begin to comprehend the sheer, devastating weight of the betrayal Marcus is experiencing in this exact millisecond? To realize that your worst enemy isn't a rival CEO, a competitor in the tech world, or a corporate spy, but the very person sleeping next to you, the person you were about to marry. What would you do if you suddenly realized your entire life for the last 6 months was a beautifully crafted death trap? Drop a comment right now and tell me how you would handle a betrayal this deep. Maya slowly stood up from the hard cam thatch floor, keeping little Zuri tightly pressed against her chest. The little girl had buried her face deep into her mother's shoulder, utterly overwhelmed by the screaming, the crying, and the sudden chaos. Maya looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with a profound mixture of heartbreak for him, but also an overwhelming sense of relief. "Mr. Sterling," Maya said softly, her voice trembling violently, "for the past few months, I wanted to say something to you. I really did. Every single time I cleaned your private study after your afternoon tea, the scent left behind in the empty porcelain cup it wasn't normal. Smelled like copper, like old rusted pennies mixed with heavy sugar. But I was just the maid. I thought I was losing my mind. I thought no one in this house would ever believe a servant over your fiancé." Marcus looked over at Maya, and a heavy, crushing wave of guilt washed over his soul. She had noticed. The quiet, invisible woman who cleaned his floors had cared more about his survival than the woman wearing his multi-million-dollar diamond ring. He had been so blinded by his fast-paced lifestyle, so distracted by his endless corporate battles, that he had completely ignored the angel in the corner of the room while warmly embracing the devil in his bed. Victoria, realizing that physical resistance was entirely useless, finally stopped struggling. She stood panting heavily in the iron grip of the 2 security guards, her makeup smeared, her designer robe disheveled. The mask of old money luxury was gone, leaving only the raw, ugly reality of an exposed criminal. She glared at Marcus, her blue eyes twisted with a venomous, unadulterated hatred. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Marcus?" she hissed, completely abandoning her fake, sweet accent. "You think you're untouchable just because you built a company worth billions? You're nothing but a pathetic, lonely workaholic fool. You were already killing yourself with stress. If it wasn't me taking you down, someone else would have done it eventually. You don't deserve this empire." Marcus didn't yell. He didn't lose his temper. He simply stared at her with an icy, crushing disdain that made her words fall completely flat. "I built this empire from the mud with my own 2 hands, Victoria," Marcus said, his voice deadly quiet. "And I am going to watch you lose absolutely everything from the window of a maximum security prison cell. Take her to the lower holding room. Lock the door, and do not let anyone in or out until the detectives arrive. You'll regret this, Marcus. My family will ruin you. You can't do this to me." Victoria shrieked as the security guards dragging her down the back hallway. Her desperate, fading screams echoed through the mansion until a heavy steel security door slammed shut, cutting her off from the world completely. The grand hallway fell back into a heavy ringing silence. But it was a completely different kind of silence now. The suffocating dark cloud that had hung over the Sterling estate for 6 months had finally begun to lift. Marcus slowly turned his body back toward Maya. He looked at her tired, beautiful face, and then down at the little girl sleeping peacefully in her arms, clutching her worn-out stuffed lion. The full weight of his new reality was crashing over him like a massive tidal wave. He wasn't just a survivor of an attempted murder plot. He was a father. The heavy steel security door at the end of the back hallway slammed shut with a definitive, echoing thud. The frantic, hysterical screams of Victoria Vance were entirely cut off, leaving the grand marble foyer of the Sterling estate in a state of absolute ringing silence. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that follows the detonation of a massive bomb. The dust was settling, but the landscape of everyone's reality had been violently and permanently altered. Marcus Sterling, the ruthless titan of the tech industry, a man who regularly negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without blinking, was entirely paralyzed. He stood frozen in the center of the lavish hallway, staring down at the terrified maid and the 3-year-old girl clutching her neck. His dark, exhausted eyes traced every single contour of little Zuri's face. The soft curve of her cheeks, the stubborn, beautiful shape of her jawline, the exact shade of her dark, soulful eyes. He didn't just see a resemblance. He saw a mirror reflecting a ghost from his past. He saw the face of the mother he had lost to cancer when he was just a teenager fighting to survive on the brutal streets of Chicago. "Maya," Marcus finally whispered. His voice did not sound like the booming, authoritative CEO who had just commanded an arrest. It sounded incredibly fragile, like dry glass about to shatter. How did I not know? How did I walk past her every single day for the last 3 years and not know? Maya slowly stood up, her knees trembling so violently that she almost collapsed against the marble pillar. She held Zuri tightly against her chest. The little girl, exhausted by the terrifying screaming match, had rested her small head on her mother's shoulder, her eyes heavy and drooping. "I tried, Marcus," Maya said, her voice cracking as a fresh wave of tears spilled over her dark eyelashes. She dropped the formal Mr. Sterling for the first time in 4 years. "When I found out I was pregnant, I tried to reach you. I called your corporate headquarters for 3 weeks straight. I sent emails. I even waited outside the lobby of your downtown skyscraper in the freezing rain." Marcus took a slow, agonizing step forward, his chest tight with an unbearable, suffocating weight. "I never received a single message. I swear to you on my life, Maya, no one ever told me." "I know," Maya sobbed quietly, the pain of 4 years of silent suffering finally breaking through her ironclad walls. "Your PR team told me. They called me a gold digger. They threatened to have me arrested for harassment. They said a rising billionaire like you didn't have time for a desperate waitress trying to secure a payday. They completely blocked my number." Marcus felt the air violently knocked out of his lungs. He stumbled backward slightly, pressing a heavy hand against his own chest. The towering, impenetrable corporate fortress he had built to protect himself from the greedy vultures of Wall Street had done its job too well. His own security protocols, his own ruthless executives, had actively destroyed his chance at a family. They had forced the woman he cared for to give birth in absolute poverty, terrified and alone. Have you ever realized that the very walls you built to protect yourself ended up keeping out the one thing you desperately needed? We spend our entire lives trying to become untouchable, trying to accumulate wealth and power so no one can ever hurt us. But in the process, how many beautiful, quiet miracles do we accidentally lock outside in the cold? Drop a comment right now. Have you ever pushed someone away out of fear? only to realize years later that they were exactly what you needed? When Zuri was born, Maya continued, her voice trembling but filled with a fierce, undeniable maternal strength, the medical bills were drowning me. I couldn't afford rent. I couldn't afford food. I applied to a luxury staffing agency because it was the only way to get health insurance for her. I swear to you, I didn't know it was your house until I walked through the front gates on my first day. Why didn't you say anything then? Marcus asked, his voice thick with unshed tears. You were right here. You were in my home. Because I was terrified. Maya finally raised her voice, the raw, bleeding trauma of an underdog echoing through the billionaire's mansion. Look at the power you hold, Marcus. You could destroy my life with a single phone call. You were engaged to a wealthy, powerful woman. If I told you the truth, what if you thought I was manipulating you? What if you used your billions to take my daughter away from me? Zuri is all I have. She is my entire world. I would rather scrub your floors on my hands and knees in complete silence for the rest of my life than risk losing her to a court system I could never afford to fight. The absolute devastating truth of her words hit Marcus like a freight train. She wasn't hiding from him out of spite. She was hiding out of pure, desperate survival. The system was rigged against people like Maya. The elite upper class, people like Victoria Vance, could crush a working-class single mother without leaving a single fingerprint. Maya had sacrificed her youth, her pride, and her dignity, silently enduring the brutal humiliation of serving her own child's father, all to keep her baby safe from the ruthless machinery of his world. Before Marcus could speak, the heavy, imposing sound of police sirens pierced the quiet evening air. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the massive stained glass windows of the foyer, casting a chaotic, frantic glow across the marble. Seconds later, the massive oak front doors burst open. Dr. Evans, Marcus's private, highly paid physician, rushed into the hallway, followed closely by a team of paramedics carrying a heavy black toxicology kit. Behind them, 3 uniformed police detectives entered, their hands resting on their utility belts, scanning the massive room. Marcus! Dr. Evans shouted, his face pale and frantic. Your security chief called me. Where is the capsule? Are you okay? Have you ingested any tea today? Marcus didn't take his eyes off Maya and Zuri. He simply raised his hand, revealing the small vacuum-sealed silver capsule resting in his palm. Dr. Evans practically sprinted across the foyer. He pulled on a pair of blue latex gloves with trembling hands, retrieved a specialized chemical testing swab from his kit, and carefully cracked the silver capsule open. A small pile of fine, crystalline white powder spilled into a sterile vial. The doctor dropped the testing liquid into the vial. The entire hallway held its collective breath. The detectives stepped closer, pulling out their notepads. Maya held Zuri tighter, watching the liquid swirl. Within 3 agonizing seconds, the clear liquid violently turned a deep, unnatural shade of neon purple. Dr. Evans dropped the vial onto the table as if it had burned his fingers. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. He slowly looked up at the billionaire. Marcus! Dr. Evans whispered, his voice shaking with absolute horror. This is a highly restricted synthetic neurotoxin. It's an undetectable heavy metal compound designed to slowly shut down the liver and the central nervous system over a period of months. It mimics a rare autoimmune disease. The doctor swallowed hard, the terrifying reality of the situation settling over the room. The dosage in this single capsule. If Victoria has been giving you this every afternoon for the last 6 months, Marcus, your organs are already failing. If you had continued drinking that tea for even 3 more weeks, you would have suffered a massive, unexplainable cardiac arrest. You would be dead. And no standard autopsy would have ever caught it. The detectives instantly tightened their jaws. One of them immediately keyed his radio. "Dispatch, we have confirmation on a lethal substance. Upgrade the charge for the suspect in holding to first-degree attempted murder." Marcus stood perfectly still. The information washed over him, chilling his blood to absolute ice. He was 3 weeks away from death. 3 weeks away from leaving his entire empire, his legacy, and his billions to a psychotic, greedy murderer. But as he looked down at the tiny, worn-out stuffed lion dangling from his daughter's sleeping hand, the billionaire realized something far more profound. Victoria's poison had been killing his body for 6 months, but his own relentless ambition, his corporate greed, and his emotional isolation had been slowly killing his soul for years. If little Zuri had not wandered out of that kitchen, if she had not dropped that shiny silver capsule on the floor, if Maya had not thrown herself into the line of fire to protect her child from Victoria's wrath, Marcus would have died in this massive empty mansion, surrounded by expensive art and treacherous snakes, never knowing he had a daughter. "Mr. Sterling," the lead detective stepped forward, his tone completely respectful. "We have an ambulance waiting outside. We need to transport you to the VIP ward at the private hospital immediately to begin a massive heavy metal flush of your system. Every second counts right now." "No," Marcus said quietly. "Sir, you have been poisoned with a lethal." "I said no," Marcus interrupted, his voice suddenly roaring back to life, filled with the absolute, unyielding authority of a man who had just reclaimed his throne. He turned to his head butler, a stoic older man who had been watching the entire scene in stunned silence. "Harrison," Marcus commanded, pointing toward the massive, sweeping grand staircase. "I want the master guest wing on the 3rd floor opened immediately. The one with the heated floors and the southern sunlight. I want it fully cleaned and prepped within the hour." The butler blinked, completely taken aback. "Right away, sir." For whom?" Marcus walked slowly across the marble, ignoring the police, ignoring the doctor, ignoring the flashing sirens outside. He stopped directly in front of the exhausted, weeping maid in the frayed apron. He slowly sank to his knees, not caring that his bespoke suit pants were pressing against the cold, hard floor. He looked up at Maya, tears finally breaking free and streaming down his own face. The billionaire was completely unguarded, completely broken open. "For my family," Marcus said, his voice breaking with a devastating, beautiful grace. "They are never sleeping in the servants' quarters ever again." The massive, sprawling Sterling estate, a place that had always felt like a glittering, suffocating prison of marble and silk, suddenly felt entirely different. Maya looked at the powerful, towering billionaire kneeling on the floor in front of her. She looked at his tears. She looked at his absolute, devastating sincerity. And for the first time in 4 agonizingly long years, she realized she no longer had to be invisible. She didn't have to hide in the shadows of the kitchen anymore. The heavy iron armor she had worn to protect her child finally cracked wide open, completely crumbling away. "Marcus!" Maya whispered, her own tears falling freely now. She slowly loosened her tight grip on Zuri, allowing the little girl to turn slightly. Zuri rubbed her heavy eyes with a tiny fist. She looked down at the man kneeling before her. She didn't fully understand the police sirens, or the screaming, or the heavy weight of the moment. But she saw the man who always looked at her with those soft, kind eyes. She saw the man who had just saved her mother from the scary lady. She reached out with one small, chubby hand and gently patted Marcus's tear-stained cheek. Marcus let out a broken, beautiful sob. He wrapped his massive arms around Maya and his daughter, pulling them both into a tight, fiercely protective embrace, right there on the floor of the grand hallway. He buried his face in Maya's shoulder, holding his family as if he would rather die than let them go again. The lead detective quietly motioned for his officers to step back, giving the family a moment of absolute privacy amidst the chaos. 6 months later, the atmosphere in the massive downtown skyscraper that housed the Sterling Empire's corporate headquarters was electric. The boardroom was packed with the most ruthless, powerful executives on Wall Street. But at the head of the massive mahogany table sat Marcus Sterling, looking stronger, sharper, and more alive than he had in years. The heavy metal flush had been a brutal, agonizing physical battle, but he had survived. And he hadn't just survived, he had completely cleaned house. Every single executive, every PR manager, every ruthless assistant who had played a part in blocking Maya's desperate phone calls 4 years ago had been fired without severance. He had rebuilt his inner circle from the ground up, prioritizing loyalty and integrity over pure corporate greed. And Victoria Vance? The trial was the biggest, most sensational media circus the country had seen in a decade. The elite, untouchable white heiress had arrived at the courthouse in a designer suit, expecting her family's massive wealth and influence to buy her a highly paid legal team and a slap on the wrist. She had sneered at the cameras, completely confident in her aristocratic privilege. But Marcus had utterly destroyed her. He had deployed an army of the most brilliant, ruthless corporate lawyers on the planet. They didn't just present the toxicology report from Dr. Evans. They unearthed a massive, sprawling trail of Victoria's digital footprints. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that she had meticulously researched the untraceable neurotoxin for months. When the guilty verdict was read, Victoria didn't scream. She didn't throw a tantrum. The reality of a 25-year sentence in a federal maximum security prison completely shattered her mind. The camera caught the exact moment her arrogant, elite facade collapsed into absolute hollow terror. Her family, terrified of the pure disaster, completely disowned her. Her wealth was frozen. Her reputation was permanently incinerated. She lost absolutely everything. Back at the Sterling estate, the massive iron gates were finally open. The dark, suffocating hedges had been trimmed back, allowing the bright, warm sunlight to flood the property. The mansion didn't smell like cold marble and sharp perfume anymore. It smelled like fresh baking, like loud, joyful laughter, and like life. Maya was no longer the invisible maid. She was the absolute heart of the estate, walking the halls with her head held high, wearing a brilliant, confident smile. And little Zuri no longer had to hide in the corners on a folded blanket. She ran freely through the massive sunlit rooms, her giggles echoing off the walls, her stuffed lion Leo clutched tightly in her hand. Marcus stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of his newly renovated study, sipping a cup of plain, hot water. He watched his wife and daughter playing on the vast green lawn below. He had spent his entire life building an empire of gold and steel, terrified of losing his power. But it took a dropped silver capsule, the terrifying shadow of death, and the incredible silent courage of an underdog made to show him the absolute truth. True power isn't about the billions in your bank account, or the iron gates you build to keep the world out. True power is having something, someone that you would gladly burn the entire world down to protect. Here's the part where you really need to stop and think. Look at how easily Victoria Vance almost got away with murder, simply because she hid behind the polished, acceptable mask of the wealthy elite. Look at how Maya, a fiercely protective mother, was ignored, silenced, and treated like disposable trash simply because she wore a maid's uniform. If Zuri had never dropped that capsule, Marcus would be dead, and Victoria would be celebrated as a grieving billionaire widow. We see this exact dynamic play out every single day in the real world. We automatically trust the people in expensive suits, and we instantly dismiss the quiet people scrubbing the floors. So, I have to ask you, and I want you to be brutally honest with yourself. When you see someone in a service uniform being yelled at or belittled or completely ignored by someone with money and power, do you actually step up and intervene? Or do you just look away, telling yourself it's none of your business, quietly allowing the arrogant elite to crush the underdogs right in front of your eyes? Don't just think about it. Go to the comments right now. Tell me, have you ever stood by and watched an injustice happen because you were too afraid to challenge someone's authority? Or have you ever been the one in the uniform praying for anyone to see you? Let's have a real conversation about the invisible people we walk past every single day. If this story made your blood boil, and then gave you that absolute rush of satisfaction at the end, hit the like button right now. And make sure you are subscribed, because the stories we tell here don't just entertain you. They force you to look at the world with your eyes wide open.